Okay, good morning, everybody. This is a recorded meeting. Before I go into the introductions, can I just check, are we ready to go? Okay, good. Right, well, welcome to the Audit and Governance Committee. We've got apologies received from Councillor Graham Wilson, and I welcome Councillor Piers Coots, who's attending as a substitute. And we have two councillors who've
Councillor Ali and Councillor Corney.
And they both, Ali and Cordy, both contacted us today with short notice reasons why they couldn't be with us, and they sent their apologies. But the great news is that we're quorate. So I'm delighted that. And I can't, particularly for new members, I can't stress too much how difficult it is maintaining the quoracy level and how important it is on you if you aren't able to attend, to have a substitute. Thank you. Declarations of interest. Sorry, I should go back a bit. This is an open meeting and recorded, and that recording stays for a month online. Okay, good. Right, now move forward. Declarations of interest. Members are asked to disclose a pecuniary interest or other interest in any of the items on the agenda unless it is already entered in their register of interests. Are there any declarations? No, thank you. As we were forewarned at our previous meeting, this is going to be a heavy morning, and we're slotted in till 2 o'clock. I think it's important. There's a lot of business on the table. We've got to be trying to keep strategic about it, but I'm also anxious, as I'm sure you are, that we have a proper debate on the many things we find in front of us. We'll take a break at 12 o'clock for about 20 minutes, and there's some refreshments. So it won't be from here till 2 o'clock, in case you were worried. I just remind members that the minutes of the last meeting were circulated to the CA board, as well as the formal letter that I sent and was published with the board papers. As part of our first big item, the improvement framework, we'll get feedback from the Chief Executive, who is Interim Chief Executive, Gordon Welcome, who's joining us online. But I hope, Gordon, you'll stay for the meeting, because there are many other aspects in which I'm sure members would like your input, or it might be informative to yourself. At our last meeting, we did ask that we have a representative from London, or the alphabet soup, which I will now read out, DLUHC, to attend this meeting, so that we could have a first-hand insight into the thinking in London and how it might affect our thinking regarding events. I have a statement from them, which I'll now read out, and maybe we'll return to it later when we've had a chance to think about how we might want to take this forward. Anyway, this was the statement that I have received. Given where we are in our support of the CPCA, and given the changing circumstances and the nature of the government until a new Prime Minister is in post, we think it is best that we do not attend on this occasion. We will continue to observe meetings and review public papers, and will be in touch as necessary. And I think that's maybe a thought we should hold in our minds as we move on. It may be a helpful exercise to hear about the experiences of improvement in Peterborough. Perhaps Eleanor Kelly, the chair of the Improvement Board, could offer interesting reflections on their improvement journey. I think we should just bear that in mind, and when we get into the whole improvement and what we do next. My personal reaction when I got it was that looking at somebody else's mechanics of an improvement journey, one has to weigh the value that might have to a committee like ours. and we perhaps take a view when we get to the item. That's all I had for my announcements. So I'd like to go on to item 3, which are the minutes of the last meeting. Action log. Am I?
People are having difficulty hearing you.
Am I not doing it properly?
You're definitely on.
I normally project. I'm obviously not doing it. Is that better? Okay. So, are we happy to accept the minutes of the last meeting as a true record?
James, just a couple of points.
And thank you, David. Where do you think that should be reflected?
Somewhere in page 6. Or somewhere in page 6. 5.6 or 5.7.
Okay. So this was about, your point is that we discussed getting an insight from officers on the impact of shortage of capacity on delivery. Was that it?
Yes, Chairman, because I just don't think as a committee we know what's happening on the ground.
Okay. Others are content with that? Okay. Well, how will we? We'll do that amendment, but how will we address that issue? Shall we bear it in mind until we've heard the improvement journey? Sorry, a technological moment. What David Brown said, Gordon, is that this feedback from officers on the effect of the capacity shortfalls on delivery, we'd like to understand what that impact is, and and perhaps when we get to your introduction of the improvement journey, you could bring that to life for us, or alternatively, we could have a note to the committee when we get there. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So we've got those 2 points. Are there any other aspects of the minutes that we think could be adjusted? Okay. Okay, on that basis, with those changes, I'll take it that we are content with the minutes. Could we now go to the action list? If we go to page, I mean, I don't know whether anybody has any comments. I normally just look to see where the open items are. Now, I found some open items on page 10. And I wondered, this is scheduled for July. Are we happy that that's covered when we get to the internal audit report? And the only other 2 are for December. Okay. Are we happy to move on to the next item? Okay. We're now moving on to item 4, the improvement framework and the review of governance. 2 very meaty papers. Before I ask the interim chief executive to provide feedback to us and introduce what is these papers represent. I think our task, as defined, is that we note the improvement framework that was presented to the CA board a few days ago. Note the response, question the interim chief executive on plans to build immediate capacity and drive culture change, and receive the review of governance and ways of working and offer observations. So that's the written remit, but I think what's incumbent on us is to try and discern in all of this the things that are material given the challenges facing the chief, the combined authority, and to try and, through scrutiny or contribution, trying to help that process. Gordon, with that introduction, are you happy to kick off?
I am, yes. Pleased to meet you all, and pleased to meet you, John. I know we had a phone call some weeks ago. In fact, I think it was 4 days before I started. This was when we spoke. I made a number of calls, including to the external auditor, yourself, officials at DLUC and Bays, all before starting. Yeah, so just to get a run at it, that was good. Would it be helpful if I just, in a heavily summarized way, say something about the improvement framework? I won't talk through that in detail because I've already done that at overview and scrutiny for 1 hour and 3/4 on Monday, and then about an hour or so at Combined Authority Board day before yesterday. And in a sense, your role's different from getting into the detail of that. But it would make sense if I just sort of give you 2 minutes on that before focusing on the questions that you'd raised. So clearly that report is not the first report on these issues to come through the system. So the very first part of the report just summarizes the letter from the external auditor raising his overall concerns, the letter from DLUC, which was about withholding some streams of funding, pending assurance about the authority's approach to the issues, and the letter from you to Combined Authority members raising concerns. So these are just heavily summarized. They've been repeated several times at several places. And what I felt was useful, even in these very early weeks, was simply to restate the problem, partly as I saw it, and in a sense, fill in the gap that I felt previous reports had, which was to leap to a mechanism of the improvement board, rather than actually sketch out what the scale of the issues were and how to approach that as an exercise. So what you have in that report is a quick summary of the background, a basic issue from me that says, in order to get moving on this at pace, some of the arrangements in the Combined Authorities Constitution build in time frames for taking issues for appointments, for instance. The facility to make interim appointments at director level isn't delegated. It's required to go through a committee process. The authority did consider adjustments to its structure 4 or 5 months ago, but that was never crystallized. Thirdly, that there are inevitably some expenses connected to the self-assessment and improvement work, but luckily there is a fund within the budget for unforeseen circumstances in the year. So one part of that report is to say, in these unusual circumstances, these extraordinary circumstances, it's recommended that you delegate a limited number of things to me to make progress over what's the summer period and very early autumn. So there are recommendations around giving me the authority to appoint interim directors and statutory officers, to finalise the structure, because there's an inherent timetable to that. There needs to be a consultation process before it can be finalised. To delegate access to a ring-fenced part of this budget to meet any necessary expenses related to improvement work over the next period of time. Then the report goes on to sketch out an approach to assessment on which an improvement plan can be sketched out. Now, we're fortunate that a number of actions have already been taken prior to me arriving that feed into that quite substantially. There's the governance review from Jodie Townsend that you've got here. There's been some other supportive work around the net zero hub delivery, which was of quite considerable concern. So there has been a consultant working with the authority for about 3 weeks taken prior to me arriving that feed into that. There's the governance review. I'm getting the tape of my voice back. Is that? I think that might have stopped now. Okay, thank you. So the point I was making is that a number of pieces of work have already been underway that feed into the self-assessment exercise. You'll see in the basic report, I've just outlined 8 areas for appraisal in self-assessment. That's not plucked from thin air. That deliberately mimics the sort of brief that has been given to other authorities when this sort of assessment should be undertaken. And you may well know that just immediately prior to me starting this engagement, I was part of a team looking at an authority in Northumberland with this sort of brief in these sort of circumstances. So I've just used that to mimic that. And I have sketched out in the table the interim conclusions you can take from the work that's already been done or the very initial meetings that I've had. And I've met every member of the Combined Authority Board individually for a period, and all of the senior management team and quite a number of others. Now, that's not the final word on the matter, but it's clearly, from my point of view, a fair indication of the state of play, and frankly, the state of play that a lot of people perceive. It's not a surprise to people. This has been emerging for a while. So that's the basic report. It was discussed, as I said, at overview and scrutiny and board. Lots of interesting, useful, purposeful questions, but the overall tone of the debate was, yeah, we recognize this is the scale and scope of the issue. We understand that in order to empower me to begin to move things over the summer and into early September, we should give these delegations. And I committed to report back at the regular meetings on a monthly basis. So this is very much a sort of kick-off report, but with a sketching out of, this is the scale and scope of what we need to be looking at. I think there's, just before I come to the particular issues for this committee, I think it's worth noting where our regulators are on this. The external auditor, in the letter he sent to the authority is, of course, a letter raising concerns about the risks of delivery of the combined authority. That's not the final word on the matter. And the responses from the combined authority, both in terms of these reports and other reports that you have on the agenda today will inform his end of year judgment about last year. As the chairman said, clearly there are things going on in the government and Conservative Party that have meant that the ministers in DLUC, who would be the relevant ministers, are now in an interim position. So I think where the civil servants felt they were clear about their choices and perspectives from ministers about any potential intervention in the combined authority, in conversation with them, clearly that's now not as clear. And from their point of view, there is even the possibility of other changes in early or mid-September once the new leader of the Conservative Party and Prime Minister is in place. There may well be, it wouldn't be a surprise if there were changes to ministerial appointments then. So there is a bit of a holding pattern, maybe more of a window than might have been expected when you had these types of conversations a month ago. But that's where we're at. So that report was accepted, well discussed. And John, I just wonder, is it helpful for me just to talk to the points in 1.2 in your paper, where that's the areas you would question me on? If I just use that as a slight framework, those 3 bullet points as a sort of introductory comment, and perhaps pick it up from there. First, that you're advising me to obtain the right
Can you say which page you're referring to? Sorry, it's so
I can't say. It's agenda item 4, page 2.
Okay.
Where there are 3 bullet points.
I think most of us, Gordon, are reading the numbers off the pack from out of 218. Which
so it's the improvement framework cover sheet for agenda item 4. Pages 11 and 12.
Okay, right. That's 11 and 12. Thank you. Yeah. Okay.
So if I just make some summary comments on these points, and then perhaps you might want to pick up, all sorts of issues. So the first recommendation was about asking me to get the right sort of external advice and support, which is about moving towards consensus. Those are the words you used. So I think I would say it was notable, the degree of consensus at both overview and scrutiny meeting on Monday and the board on Wednesday. So I've got to think quite hard which day is which at the minute. There's only short breaks between them. There was no one in either of those meetings dissenting from the view that this was a serious situation for the combined authority, that the sorts of issues that had sketched out in the initial observations, initial evidence, were the right sorts of things, even if a few people felt that was more of a challenge than they personally had recognized. And certainly there was unanimous support for the recommendations for the adjustments to delegation for a temporary period to get on. I mean, in terms of external advice, I think to this extent, I've certainly been engaging with officials at DLUC and Bays on a number of occasions in the last few weeks, both about their perception of issues, their consideration, and where they felt they were positioned at this point in time. So I think I think we're at a stage where the journey needs to continue beyond this initial phase. But from my point of view, this initial phase is about putting some of the fires out and setting the context for the ability to undertake some work over coming weeks. So we may well engage a number of other people to help with the self-assessment and to bring that degree of independence. But I am considering and have proposed to DLUC that the action of the Combined Authority in engaging Jodie Townsend as an independent person to conduct a governance review is an important and valid input to that. There is the input from a sort of BASE approved consultant, Richard Hall, looking at the zero carbon work. I have prevailed on some ex-colleagues in Oxfordshire to partly release the senior programme manager from the Oxfordshire Growth Board as an independent voice to look at several strands of work. And he's been engaged for the last 3 weeks. And I'm considering about other inputs to that. The second point on your report is about reconsidering the terms of reference of the improvement panel. And I think in all honesty, I felt that some of the activity around describing the panel was about a bit putting the cart before the horse. In a sense, we want to conduct self-assessment and bring a group together to question and oversee that, and then the improvement plan that would get designed around that. Now, that doesn't need to take very long, but I think for me, it's not the first thing on the agenda. That's something to address over the coming weeks, and I'll do that. The third point is about rapidly increasing some of the senior management team capacity, because that is a fundamental challenge, and it's a challenge to do additional work around improvement rather than what people might think is doing the day job. There's a fair bit of movement in this arena, even just in the it's almost 4 weeks now. I think is Edwina Adefahinti in the room, or not? One of the engagements has been an acting monitoring officer, and Edwina has now been with us for several weeks and is fulfilling that role very actively in this week. I think this might be her second week. Yeah. The second is that there was already in place a part-time 50% secondment from Steve Cox from the County Council, overseeing a part of the transport work and some of the other areas of project. That was due to finish today. The county, I've requested an extension to that with the County Council, and a 3-month extension has been agreed, and that allows some continuity of that work in supervision of those areas. And I've asked him to play a role in the transition to a new structure over the next couple of months. Thirdly, I did mention the BASE approved consultant was looking at the net zero hub work, which is a very big issue in its own right, and asked him to take a longer term engagement with us, and he's agreed to do that and support that work over perhaps up to 6 months. Jodie Thompson was clearly engaged to do the particular piece of work around the governance review and picked up some additional tasks over the last weeks. And I've invited him to join us to help with implementation of a range of those issues. And he's agreed to do that as well. And then lastly, in terms of capacity in the very short term, if you recall, I was asking for delegated authority to appoint interim directors from the board on Wednesday. I had already been undertaking that work and interviewed people over the last 4 or 5 days. So I'm now in a position to finalise the appointments of 2 interim directors who will be able to start within the next couple of weeks, while we move on to firming up the permanent structure and potentially beginning that recruitment process in September. So I wonder if I should just leave it there, John, and people pick up other types of issues as and when.
Thank you, Gordon. Before I put the floor in, could I just ask for a couple of other insights?
Sure.
Which are, the bit about capacity really goes back to the point made when we took the minutes. I think it's true to say that this committee was unsighted on the depth of the capacity issues. So anything more you could put in context about capacity for delivering business as usual, like, as opposed there's capacity issues about delivering an improvement framework. I realise that. And the other point that we raised when I wrote to the board and was our concern was that unless there's a culture change at the top for collective leadership, then we found it difficult to see how all of this would play out. And I'd be interested in what was your sense in the board as to whether that message, and we played one version of it, but it's about cultural change and the softer issues which are fundamental to leadership of an organisation. Have you any insights as to whether that message is taken on board or is or not? And then I'll throw it open to questions if you could answer those.
Okay, sure. So the first one is on capacity. Part of, at the most senior level, there is a very significant gap, and that's a combination of vacant posts that haven't been filled for some time. So in business and skills, there's been a holding arrangement there for some months. Several other people are off for a variety of reasons, and there are a number of employment issues to be resolved. So there's a pretty serious gap there. And so the bringing in of a couple of interim directors is not narrowly about the improvement plan. It's actually about creating more substantive tier 2 capacity while we move to being able to fill some of those posts in a more permanent way. The capacity more generally in the organisation, again, is, I think, quite a serious issue. So in the round, there have been about 30% of posts vacant, which is incredibly high. Some of those, the board received a report late June about the state of play and the plans for closing some of that gap. Some of those gaps have been filled by internal acting up arrangements, a small number of interim arrangements, but fundamentally, we need to make a little bit faster progress about appointing 2 posts, notwithstanding the challenge and the difficulty of finding the right people, particularly for certain types of posts. It's the arena that the combined authority works in, especially in transport. It's a difficult to recruit part of the market all round. I guess the complexity in that really does just need to be recognised. The scale of vacancies was a combination of vacancies that had arisen because of departures, and therefore a legitimate question mark about was action being taken swiftly enough to cover those gaps. But it also features new posts. So in the net zero hub area, actually there are quite a number of new posts that have not yet been filled for the first time, and that's in a sense more difficult because it's a high demand area. You know, the government initiative to increase work in net zero is not just in our patch, it's across the whole country. So there are many organizations looking for the same skills. But that's what gives rise to the scale of that. But clearly there's the beginnings of a plan and action to begin to fill those things. The second main point you raised was around culture change. I absolutely understand that. It's not just about a mechanistic exercise of having people in posts and getting on with work in the ways that were done before. It is about, in terms of improvement, it is about, first and foremost, understanding and acceptance of some of the things that might need to change, about ways of working, about settled processes, about where it's appropriate to have more delegation. So one of my observations would be the Constitution is set up to over-centralize a range of issues that would not be that common in individual councils. Quite why we got to that position here, I'm not clear, but clearly that set of rules contributes to just clogging the agenda at Combined Authority Board. You know, a good proportion of the business that comes to Combined Authority Board has already been through other panels and had hours of discussion. So there are some basic structural issues, I think, to be resolved. The discussion on Monday and Wednesday, I think there was a sense in which that was quite a sober discussion. People did feel actually a point had been reached where the only way forward was to embrace greater understanding about some of the tension and difficulties and to make the changes as necessary. So as far as that, you know, I don't want to overstate it, but as far as the nature of those discussions go about recognizing that this has to be a point of inflection, I think that message was quite clear in those meetings. I would also add to that, you know, I did mention earlier, I have met every single board member individually, some for several hours, to talk about their involvement, their view of issues, their view of the future. And I would take from that, you know, some optimism that, you know, many of these issues are not a surprise to people. I mean, clearly, like many situations like this, negative aspects take a while to emerge and they're not invisible. And eventually you get to a point where it becomes irresistible to say, look, something significant has to be done to change things. For me, that's a necessary point to arrive at in order to move forward. So I take some optimism about that, but that means we've still got to do it all.
Thank you, Gordon. Ask members now for comments. Perhaps we've got to bear in mind this is so complicated, and as the interim chief executive said, he said two goes around the buoy with the Combined Authority Board and overview and scrutiny. So we need to try and stick to our knitting about what the purpose of audit and governance is, which is the machinery in place? Are we assured that it's working properly? Not necessarily which ways they're going to resolve the problems that exist. But with that caution in mind, I'm happy to take comments, questions from members. Simon.
Could speak loud.
Okay.
Yeah.
We do have an issue with the microphones. We're being checked, but otherwise projection is what I encourage.
I'm afraid I can't hear the member. I still can't hear the member.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm just looking at the improvement framework in the round, and it seems to me that it's a very significant body of work. And my concern is that we'll lose the trees for the wood, and there is this need to focus on the fundamentals. I made remarks similar to this on Monday, and I just want to repeat those so that this committee can hear those points. I think we need to reflect back on what Ernst Young said, and that they gave us early warning of what their concerns are leading up to their end of year report, as you referred to, Gordon, and that the judgment that they will make. And I'd like to think that doing everything we can to make sure that the Ernst Young report is positive, notwithstanding the situation that we're in, would be extremely helpful. And you've also referred to your conversations with Dulac, and you referred to their perceptions and issues of concern. And similarly, when they're reorganising themselves in September, October, it would be extremely helpful if their perceptions and issues can be demonstrated that they're being addressed, and that both parties, Dulac and Ernst Young, also have confidence in the combined authority that it's getting to grips with the improvement plan. It's got a good programme, and it's got the capacity and capabilities to deliver it. Because the three things I mentioned on Monday were about the priorities being the mission, the capacity and governance. I've reflected further on this during the course of the week, and I believe reputation is the fourth one. And and they're the building blocks for good reputation with those key stakeholders, Ernst Young and Dulac. I'm getting into the weeds a bit, but I think it's actually important, and perhaps straying strictly from the terms of reference of this committee, but I do want to mention this, is that I've overlaid the 8 elements of the self-assessment against the 6 indicators of weak governance and poor performance. And I think there are a couple of elements in there that I think need drawing out in the self-assessment exercise. The first one of those is the third bullet of the 6 indicators of poor culture and weak governance, which is poor and inappropriate counsellor conduct. This has been something of the elephant in the room. We know all this. In fact, the entire population of Cambridge and Peterborough know about all of this. But it's not that explicit in these meetings, and I want to pull that out, and I think it has to be up front and centre to this issue. And the second point that's not drawn out sufficiently is bullet 5 of the 6 indicators, which refers to inadequate protection for whistleblowers. And again, that's flagged by Ernst Young, I believe. And I think, again, that needs to be very prominent in the self-assessment exercise, and that we see early progress against that for the safeguarding of the staff. There's going to be a key issue in terms of the recruitment process going progressing. Now, just looking at the improvement framework and all the elements that I've been able to pick out that are going to constitute this framework, and it is something of a search party. It just needs to find all these elements and join them all together, and it'd be useful to be able to see that as a piece. So we have the immediate capacity building, organisation structure, response to the Audit and Governance Committee's letter, the external audit letter concerns, response to the governance review, and the 8 dimensions of the self-assessment. And elsewhere in the papers, I've identified the even better transformation program feeding into this, and elements from internal audits. There's references to the operation of formal governance process, employment process, internal organisation and development, and there's a whole schedule of actions arising from the internal audit work, current and programme, and it amounts to quite an overwhelming body of work. And I think within all of that, there does need to be a degree of prioritisation around the really key important structural points that are going to help achieve the change in the organisation that's needed. That's not to devalue all of those elements, because they're all needed, but it's just a question of pace and programming and not being overwhelmed and losing sight of the really fundamental issues that we have in front of us. And just want to make one final point, which relates to the improvement board terms of reference. The first flawed set of terms of reference went through a committee cycle, and it's next due, the revised terms are due in front of the board on the 21st of September. And I suggested that overview and scrutiny meet in August so that they can see sort of interim or draft terms of reference, so they can discuss and debate that and be satisfied that there are going to be sufficiently robust, sound terms of reference that can be accepted by the board without a need for further review, because I think it's fundamentally important that we get on, we crystallise that and get on with that. And I think it's important that the chair of this committee too is engaged in that process, that he's satisfied that those terms of reference are the ones that we need to deliver the improvement programme. Thank you.
Okay. I think we're going to...
I have a second. Is that working? Okay, that's okay. Thank you. No, I just really want to pick up on what Gordon had said about the...
Can you hear that, Gordon?
I can, yes, thank you.
The arguably sort of over-centralised nature of the combined authority, you know, as laid down in the Constitution, and you know, it seems to me that we're in really a position where we have insufficient staff, and then this centralisation introduces a sort of democratic overhead, doesn't it? Because every time something comes to a board, there's a report to be written, and where we're already at 70% of staff, you know, that leaves even less people to do the kind of executive functions that we're supposed to be doing, and that puts the authority in further jeopardy, it seems to me. So I just think that anything we can do to streamline there would have multiple benefits.
Any other comments? Before you respond, perhaps, I mean, I think in trying to get an assurance within the audit and governance context, the point about the range, I mean, 43 recommendations, I think I've seen. This is mammoth. And I think in looking forward for assurances that effective improvement is underway, that the timelines and the manageability and the prioritization and the need to avoid overlap. I notice, I don't have a page in front of me, but the need to harmonize the roles of the overview and scrutiny and audit. these are just one of the ways that we could perhaps make it simpler, because when I look at all the papers today, there is an element of regurgitating what I just read in the previous paper, and that is not productive in staff time. So I think assurance is looking for the pragmatism and the doability of this journey, and a sensible timeline, which I take inferred really from the comments of colleagues. I don't know whether you want to react to that, Gordon.
Yes, I mean, clearly it's a major element of being able to move forward. In a micro sense, I mean, what I expect to be happening, I mean, manageability is everything, but it has to be balanced with pace. So pace is really important here. We can't take 3 months to do a self-assessment exercise and then sketch out the improvement plan. So there has to be a balance. So I am envisaging that by using the information that's already been pulled together, particularly the governance review, and some other pieces of work over August, that will be sufficient to sketch out a wide range of the issues reliably and produce a self-assessment report. Now, I say that both realizing it's pretty challenging to do that, especially over the summer, and the fact that when I and 2 chief executive colleagues conducted that form of assessment exercise in Northumberland, it stretched over 3 months. So I have a sense of what it can take, but I also have a sense of what's already been done here that can contribute to that. So in the very short term, I envisage 2 phases to getting to that self-assessment. One will be effectively a longer collation of information against the 8 criteria that's set out in the report to board, some of which we already have. That will really just be more descriptive than anything else. But there's then a phase needing to turn that into, with a bit of analysis and synthesis, boil that down to what are the core issues, the priority issues, and the approach to be taken to improvement, rather than, yes, we have 20 issues that we all have to put right. I mean, issues play differently and have different effects. So the self-assessment report that will go to board in September will be that second report. It won't be a 50 pages long. It will be a boiling down of information collected and a bit of analysis about the problem and how to approach it. So it won't contain everything. It will set those priorities and narrow that improvement agenda for the early phase. In putting together an improvement plan, it's really important that we have one improvement plan in the organization. So the Even Better transformation program has lots of good things in it. And part of the exercise in the early autumn will be to draw together the activities that we want to focus on at that time. And I agree with the points made that some of this activity, some of the necessary improvement activity will have to be sequenced. It's not all equally important, and some things will have more impact than others. And therefore, the time frame for improvement that might come out of this exercise may well be over several years. But what's really important is that we address the most salient points in the first 3 to 6 months, not try and do everything. But that does mean, you know, in the ongoing organisation, there'll be other things, in particular service areas or technical changes that will have to be subsequent pieces of work, it seems to me.
Thank you. And I've always wrestled as being chair of this committee about what is our bit of this work. It's never been in my mind that the way we do briefings or the way one committee works with another, it's not for us to choose what's the right way of doing that. It's just to be assured that there is a structural management framework in place, that it is operating as in the way it was written down, that it's compliant. And I notice in all of this bad news, the combined authority has been compliant with the principles of governance. So we mustn't distort where we are. So it seems to me that the tempo, focus, the first principle of war is selection and maintenance of the aim. And if we're in that situation, it seems to me, colleagues will put me right if I misrepresent what they think. For us, we need assurance that the input from the auditors, both external and external, is going to be fixed in a timely fashion, within a sensible timeline, in order to get that audit assurance that the CPA is on track. And that, I believe, is what members are looking for this calendar year, to have achieved that, to change the opinion of those who are professional looking at the way the CPCA works. So that would be my fundamental thing that, from an audit committee point of view, we're looking for. I see nods. I don't see any objections from my colleagues. I welcome your reaction to that as being our focus as an audit committee.
Yes, I think that's right. Are the things being done that give assurance to auditors? I think it is important just to be clear that the letter from the external auditors that came in June, of course, relates to the year 21-22, and there will be a final version of that, of a letter, you know, the annual report from the auditor. It would seem to me to be unlikely that there will be assurance to the external auditors in that letter to say, well, everything looks like it's on track and all great. I hope what might be possible is that the external auditor sees that the risks that he raised in his letter, that are in your reports, that he would recognize that the initial actions to respond to these give some grounds for assurance that they're being tackled. They clearly can't be. There will not be evidence that they've been put right, but that the mechanisms are beginning to be in place that should give some level of assurance that the early approach looks like it will be effective. Then his next letter, which will be about this year, from 22-23, there should be much clearer evidence year end of progress actually made in that. So we're in a sort of slightly tricky place with all of this. We can't reinvent last year. We can't reinvent the actions that might or might not have been taken at the tail end of the year. But I think it is within his remit to reflect the reaction to issues raised, and certainly the reaction to the letter the letter of challenge about risks that he sent to the authority.
I think we're broadly aligned there, but as we also know, and from my conversations with the external auditor, the music doesn't stop because you reach a date in a financial. No, it merges one to another. But yes, it's that assurance we're looking for, that credible action is in hand, And when we later in this agenda, we'll be talking about the qualified opinion from the internal auditors as well. I think before we move on to the next bit, I've always been conscious of the amount of makey-worky that goes on in the bureaucracy. And I think we do look for some insights from the executive team on where we could help by finding ways which are less labour intensive. And equally, when I look at some of the papers today, I don't think they've answered the exam question. I spent my life writing papers for boards, and you sometimes write what you think they want to know, and I don't sense in some of these papers that we're getting what is actually happening. And I think there's some poor person sitting there, what do I put on paper in order to satisfy this agenda item? I give you an example. When we get to trading companies, it doesn't tell us anything about how the combined authority are governing trading companies. It regurgitates what we've had in the last 3 papers in the last 18 months. Now, that isn't good productive work for any of us. So where we can help in getting candid, how it really is, simple writing to us and not be duplicating, I think that's a part we can play as you begin to try and shake down what the improvement journey is and how much effort's involved in it. Are we happy to draw a line there, and that before we go on to the piece of work that Jodie has laboured on for so many months? Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Jodie. Would you like to introduce your element of this paper?
Thank you, Chair. So in regards to the element, obviously that is the review of governance and ways of working. I was commissioned to undertake that review by the monitoring officer back in October. I was commissioned to undertake that review with a specific focus on engaging constituent council leaders, constituent council chief executives and the mayor in terms of undertaking a series of interviews with those individuals to get their perspectives on what are the key barriers to delivering effective decision making at the combined authority. I think it's fair to say that that engagement was very open and honest with all those individuals that all played a very active part in providing information, perspective and opinion, and that is was very gratefully received as part of that review, and slightly different to some of the other similar reviews I've taken at other combined authorities. The leaders in particular were very forthcoming with assessments of themselves as well as of the various barriers mentioned in the report. Now, the report focuses on 5 significant areas. Governance foundations and fundamentals at the start, I would draw all committees' attention to as being the most significant area where I think the most improvement is required. The current position in regard to foundations and fundamentals, the report refers to it being very difficult for a governance framework to operate effectively if it cannot reflect the strategic planning and objectives of the organisation, and that is down to obviously a lack of clarity around the strategic planning process and the strategic objective setting process within the combined authority at this moment in time. The report also refers to 4 other areas: governance, culture and behaviours, governance as an enabler, that's in relation to engagement with our constituent authorities and communications as a whole, the governance framework itself, whether we have the right committees in place with the right remits, the right boards. I think it's very clear, it was very clear very early on that the Combined Authority Board has far too wide a remit, and this obviously relates to the centralisation that Gordon has referred to. A lot of the power is held within that board, and they therefore have a lot of meetings considering a lot of items, and there is very little opportunity for really detailed strategic debate as a result of that forum. There are obviously executive committees. Those executive committees are reported to have delegated decision-making powers. Those decisions often then have to go back to board for confirmation, and there is reference to that in the report. My argument would be that those are not really true delegations in that sense. There's also references in there to a section on governance process. I think there was a lot of areas we can immediately pick up to improve in regards to governance process, in particular things such as our forward planning. But this again does link into the foundations and fundamentals. Forward planning is a lot simpler when you have a midterm plan with reflective annual business plans and you know what's coming and why it's coming and what decision is required. And that is obviously something we really do need to focus on as a combined authority. As you mentioned, there are numerous recommendations in the report. Conversations have already begun with the governance lead from the board, Councillor Edna Murphy, who was confirmed at board this week. And we are drawing a plan together with her for immediate quick wins, immediate process improvements, and identifying other areas where we think some initial work can be delivered very, very quickly. One of the things I took from board is a conversation on Wednesday. There's a sense for us to get to the point where we have clarity around the governance framework, as in the committee structure, as early as we possibly can. We've also identified a number of constitutional areas where we believe we can deliver quite quick wins. You'll all hopefully be aware within your own constitutions at your own constituent authorities, you have clear decision-making principles. We do not have those defined in our constitution. That obviously impacts things like the call-in process, as well as the reporting framework around what is in your reports that come to boards and committees. That is something we can fix very, very quickly. That will subsequently allow us to very, very quickly fix the call-in process. And we will also be undertaking a review of delegations and principles around delegations, officer delegations, as well as member ones, as well as committee ones, and getting some clarity around powers and responsibilities of the mayor. We've already made improvements as a result of this report to the MDN, mayoral decision note, and officer decision note process, making sure that there is far more transparency around both of those processes and they're properly reported in line with the transparency code on our website. And we have already had a direction from this committee to do work around the code of conduct. The member officer protocol that came from this committee went to board on Wednesday and was endorsed. That will now be adopted into our constitution in support of the code of conduct. And you have already instructed us to develop a supporting social media protocol to further enhance that member officer protocol and to look at both those documents in the round alongside the code of conduct to make sure they all fit together, there's clarity, there's guidance, and everyone understands what's required both from a member and an officer perspective. So the report is as presented. Happy to take any further questions on that from members.
So we were asked to receive the review and ways of working and offer observations. Are there any comments, colleagues? David Brown.
Wow, it's gone green this time. Does that mean? Oh, it does mean it's working. Excellent. Just a couple of comments, please, Chair. Reading through the report, one bit that leapt out to me, and I don't know whether this resonates with other members or not, was a bit on communications and improving the communications from the CA. I think it referred to stakeholders. I don't know about others, but I don't feel like I get anything from the combined authority as to what's happening, what its successes are, or where it's going, whatever. Whether that's a breakdown somewhere inside my district council, I don't know. But I would have thought, as members of this committee, we ought to be being kept informed about what's going on at the CA.
Thank you. Any other comments? There were a number of things that struck me in this, which, I mean, I commend Jody for his thoroughness and comprehensive nature of his work. And there were and I've always had trouble with ways of working, which I'm glad you mentioned, versus governance per se. But there were a couple of things that I don't think we've, or it's brought to our attention if we go to page 80 and 79, 80 I think, where we should have, it is a conclusion in this paper that the Audit and Governance Committee should be more integrated with the work of performance and risk. And we have, I'll remind ourselves that we have been waiting really for 2 or 3 meetings for a revamp of the approach to risk, which under the previous chief executive, and this is actually the first, when we get later to it on the agenda, is the first time we've seen such a thing. And there's a comment in on page 80 regarding the single assurance framework and whether we should have a closer role in that. And then on the top of page 81, it makes the point that it's surprising that the committee has not included behaviours on their work programme. This is the behaviour of the Combined Authority Board, or been engaged to assist in the member observation of the Code of Conduct and or advise on related training. That caused me to go back to have a look at our terms of reference, and we do indeed are charged with implement the obligation to ensure high standards of conduct amongst members. Now, maybe this is my innocence as not being a local government political person, but I rather saw that when there was a problem, it would be referred to us rather than us to go investigating. And I think when we, later in the year, when we have an item on the work programme to try and learn as to what we as an Audit and Governance Committee can pick up from all of this, I would ask that we do have a debate on our role in standards, because actually when you look at our terms of reference, there are quite a few bullets, and that we should bear in mind the comments about the single assurance framework approach that are in the report, because as I've said many times, it is a challenge for us on the outside of the organisation to get the texture. And if, as we just heard, that texture is not coming down through the constituent councils, I mean, the need for the chief executive to come to each of our meetings and give us an update was one elastoplast, I suppose, to try and bring the life of the business up to us. But so I think in this report, the vastness, is it 43 recommendations, Jodie? Something enormous anyway. We need to take particular reference of those areas which relate to us, and later in due course sit down and think about it and see where we can learn from this. I don't know whether you wanted to add a comment, Jodie.
I was just going to say that's very, very much welcomed, and I know the Scrutiny Committee is intending to do the same in regards to recommendations to about the scrutiny function and enhancing accountability arrangements. And also part of this, to make sure everyone understands the context of some of those comments you've referred to, that hopefully it's raised in the report and comes through that a lot of this is the Combined Authority internal systems of control not necessarily making this committee aware of particular matters and issue. It's about us making sure that we provide you with the right information in the right format at the right time. And there's obviously a question around whether that is currently being successful. My view clearly is that from this review that is not, and there is improvements that we can do around that. In regards to the assurance framework as well, I think it would be a good thing for the committee to consider about how it can assure itself that there is compliance with our assurance framework across the work being undertaken by the Combined Authority and its partners, as well as looking at the assurance framework itself to make sure it is fit for purpose and reflects current and existing best practice.
So just in that little bit, there's a lot. So can I conclude by saying I think we welcome the report and we look forward to it being fused into the improvement journey, and that we will later in the year as a committee wish to look at the lessons for us and the insight that the combined authority process may have not been referring to as the matters of import. We would encourage officers to think about that. I mean, the example is the capacity one. We never, ever knew that it was so serious. And it's easy with hindsight. It's a question of how do you get on the front foot. So we look to that strengthening. Okay. Did you want to add anything, Gordon, or was? No. Okay. Thank you very much. Well,
Councillor Smith.
sorry, Councillor Smith.
Yeah, I think the scope and extent of the issues raised on pages 79, 80 of the governance review relating to this committee, I think we need to have our own improvement plan. And I think it's incumbent on us to lead by example. And I would like to have a report to the next meeting setting out the steps and the changes that this committee needs to make to adopt the recommendations and advice that's set out here, which really only just gives clarification to your point about it at some time in the future. I think that future could be, I think it's the 30th of September. And I don't know whether you would support that, Chair.
Any other comments on that point? I think there is a timing issue. We do have it slotted for December. And I think, given everything else that's going on, I think we need to reflect with an insight as to see how a bit more about how the improvement journey. So I'd rather just stick with the schedule in the work program. But I absolutely agree that we need to learn and have a way forward that specifies the areas in which we will see our own improvements. We'll bring that item to a close, which we've done it about an hour. And we now move on to item 5, which is the review of the corporate risk register and the risk management strategy. And who is talking to us?
Good morning, Chairs. Chris Bolton, the head of the programme office.
Good morning, Chris.
Good morning. Good morning to you.
I'm just seeing what our duty is before I allow you to kick off. We're asked to note the report and approve. I'm always nervous of an audit committee approving much because we're not an executive committee, but we'll hear what you say about the risk register responsibility be moved elsewhere within the combined authority. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Chair. Just some background to the paper. The corporate risk register is populated by the individual projects, risk registers, and indeed directorate risk registers. The risks feed through via a monthly highlight report process. Projects that the authority undertakes are reported upon each month. They're reviewed each month by the programme office in particular, also the risk and also they're reviewed at the internal officer performance and risk committee. I think you would have noted that in the last report as well. Back in January, our external auditors, RSM, were engaged to have a look at the combined authority approach to how we manage risks, and they came forward with 9 recommendations. You'll see those in the Pathfinder report that's attached to the paper. 4 of said recommendations have already been implemented. In particular, the risk register template has been revised, has been updated. We've adopted a non-multiplier scoring system with regards to the risk registers. We ran through a sort of refreshment or a new exercise looking at the corporate risk register with regards to the new template, and equally looking at more relevant risks. Some of the items that are on the risk register previously have been on there quite some time. Indeed, some of them related to the sort of previous mayor, so it gives you an idea of how long some of the actions have been on there. And also we've also implemented sort of an action plan around when we're going to implement said actions. As you noted earlier, Chair, this is the first opportunity to bring the update regarding this work, the risk audit, to the committee for comment and obviously to note, as we mentioned. There's also an updated copy of the corporate risk register attached to the paper in Appendix 1. The risk owners are on the call today, so if there's any sort of additional detail you might want to sort of dig into some of the risks and mitigations, they're happy to sort of talk through the thinking behind them. And the last point, really, Chair, is around the responsibility and resource associated with looking after the corporate risk register. At the moment, it sits within the governance team. As a senior management team, we felt that probably wasn't in that place. It should sit under the sort of umbrella of the programme office, given all the reporting that we do, with regards to the programme of work. If the paper is supported today, we would need to update the risk strategy, the risk management framework, and also in the assurance framework. And if it is supported, then we'll look to go out across the organisation to train officers in the new way of looking at the risks. In addition, we'll be looking to do a risk appetite exercise that we're hoping to do with this committee in the near future too. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Comments from members? David Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for that presentation. I must admit, when I looked at it, I was somewhat surprised there was only 15 risks identified inside the CA, but some of them are quite broad-ranging, so I'll accept that. One that does leapt out to me now, though, and it's because Gordon mentioned it earlier on, was the net zero hub. There's a risk in here about the energy hub. Are we talking about the same thing, or are they two different hubs? And if there is clearly a problem with the net zero hub, why isn't it in here as a risk?
I admitted to say that I understand the directors for these risks are available online. If they're listening in, is the appropriate lead able to answer the one about the energy hub?
Shall I? Good morning, Chair. The question you asked is, are they the same thing? And they are. The Southeastern Energy Hub was rebranded to the Southeastern Net Zero Hub, which was a BEIS national thing, just rebranding, and that happened in April.
Thank you. Yes, I'm grateful for the directors to be listening in. This is an innovation, as to give members that opportunity to ask questions like that. When I read, I don't know whether RSM want to make a comment, because when I read their recommendations about risk appetite and other weaknesses they identified, do they want to give us any insight as to how they see the reaction to this, or what was any worries they had when they were putting together their findings?
Unfortunately, there, Chair, the RSM rep couldn't be available this morning.
No,
I'm happy.
I've got them in the room.
Oh, sorry. Okay, even better then.
I don't know whether it's the right bit of RSM, but I put them on the spot and see what they've got to say.
It is a different bit of RSM. We had a specialist risk management consultant dealing with this particular aspect who's produced this Pathfinder report for us. But I can say that the sorts of recommendations that are being produced here are very much in line with what we would see within the sector, within the wider not-for-profit sector, and indeed in the corporate sector as the way that organisations are approaching risk management now. So it's very much in line with what we would see as best practice.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm leading from the front a bit today because it's such a mammoth thing. We do still need a better way of representing the risks. I've all gone blind going into your sheets. And where we did have for a while a top 3 or 4 risks in the text, just to show, what are the hallmarks of the problems, of the risks facing them, and some movement in them, whether they're going up and down. And so a little bit more narrative that guides us into these spreadsheets, because we know it's a dilemma how you try and pack all this information together. Then I have an observation that to me, there's a risk missing here. There's the silos of the problem, but where's the one at the top saying the future viability of the combined authority? Because that's how I would add all these up. And that's why we've got so many papers in front of us. So sometimes I've found with risk, if you can stand back and say, okay, well, these are the component parts, but what does it strategically tell me? And there is a real strategic challenge facing, which covers all of these elements of money and delivery and that, and HR. So I would be good to see that, something that reflects that thought next time. And then lastly, I don't think it is appropriate for this committee, I've got to decide where you park your work within the combined authority. What we want is effective risk management system that gives a proper insight into the risks facing the authority that they're being addressed. How you do it we're not competent to give you that. So you must do the combined authority must do what the combined authority thinks is best. But I do now I've prompted some questions with some of my outrageous leadership. David Brown.
Thank you, Chairman. Just briefly another one, because it sort of runs through some of our other agenda items as well. RSM are saying we should be aligning risks to the corporate objectives, and yet elsewhere in these papers, basically we're being told what the CA board needs to do is actually get some corporate objectives and see where we're going in the future. So how can you align the risks to something that doesn't exist so far? So let's get the corporate objectives sorted out, and then we can start aligning risks to them.
Do you have any reaction to that bombardment, Chris?
Well, I mean, all really good direction there. We'll note the fact that we need to present the risk register in a different format next time, as you mentioned, give us some narrative and sort of, a top 4 or 5 risks, including sort of the movement, whether the risks are increasing or escalating or decreasing. We can add the sort of overarching risk around the future viability of the organisation. So that's a very easy thing to do, given all the spotlight and the work that goes into it at the moment. And lastly, the last point around aligning risk to corporate objectives. Yeah, absolutely, it certainly does make sense, and we can make amendments to the risk register to make sure that that's quite clear.
Gordon, did you want to have any comments on our reactions? Gordon, you're muted.
So someone else must be in charge of the muting. It's always a bit tricky when someone mutes you. I'd really just react to the general point that I think was it Councillor Brown made about a broader medium-term strategic plan. I mean, that would be certainly, I mean, Jodie's picked that up in his report, and that would be my initial reaction as well, which is the plan that exists is very substantially a one-year plan. Where we need to move to is have some form of three-year strategy and plan annually updated, and similarly 3-year outline budget and financial plan flexed each year. And I think that, you know, that point that says you need a plan against which to judge the risks is fundamental, and I think it's not quite right yet. Let's just put it like that.
Thank you. When are we next due to see the risk register? When do you think we're next due to see the risk register, Chris?
It's usually quarterly, Chair.
So the December meeting.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think so, yeah.
Councillor Smith had a-
Sorry. This is my.
If I could have a word.
Simon Smith wants to say something.
I do. I mean, it's a facetious comment, but were we supposed to read pages 99, 100 and 101? I don't think I think my colleague perhaps is trying to read them at the moment. I can't read them. Just going back to, or going forward to the annual internal report, audit report opinion, it talks about the overall adequacy, effectiveness of the organisation's risk management, control and governance processes. And it seems to me what have we got in front of us here, unless I've missed it in the body of the report, is that we've got a document here that actually sets out something that can provide the overall adequacy of the risk management. And I think it's a good framework, frankly. Because if I can understand it, then we've got a good chance it's going to be okay. But my question relates to the heat map. How are we going to know when things go from green to amber, amber to red, the actions on red, and then the improvement, seeing the improvement red to amber and amber to green? And I think that addresses the chair's point about, we're not so much interested in the mechanisms, we're interested in seeing how well we're doing. And I think what we need to know is, under the audit and governance futures, how that's going to be reported to us, I think on a meeting by meeting basis, or however frequently the chair decides to advise the committee on what would be appropriate. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Chris, any comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, with some of the sort of changes that we'll make to the risk register and the narrative, if it's okay, Chair would like to come back and sort of pass them, pass your eyes first to make sure that you're happy with the report. And of course, we can make any amendments before we get to the next quarterly report. So as a committee, you're happy with how the risks are being reported.
That would be helpful just on the format. I mean, it needs to be alive. We need to, it needs to have the right things in it, and something needs to be done. I was in one organisation, it was the local police for a while, and they thought they dealt with the risk by putting it on the risk register. I mean, that was the culture within the organisation. Further down the chain, well, I put it on the risk register, so it's solved. But it's actually knowing that it's alive, and that prompts in my mind: will the self-assessment exercise cover, Gordon, the cultural, the view of risk within the organisation? Will it be part of the self-assessment exercise? I take that as a yes, it will be. You've been muted
Off again. Yeah. It's terrible. Yeah. Yes, it was a simple answer. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you, Chris. This is a never-ending journey, and with so much going on at the moment, do take that time between now and December to try and. It's the approaches we've been talking about here, and yes, if you've got something straightforward on your approach you'd like to share with us nearer the time before you go final, please do, because I'm sure members would be very happy to give you some feedback. Okay.
That's very kind. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, directors who were listening in, wondering why we haven't asked them any questions, but we'll get better at it. Thank you. And that's so I'll move on now to the next item. Thank you. Which is, we now have a suite of 3 items from internal audit. We've got, we're going to take a break in 25 minutes, so that's not a target. We'll end, if we've got to one and we haven't got time for the next within a couple of minutes, we'll find a natural moment to pause. Okay, so I'll hand over to you, Anna.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, so the first of our reports is the progress report.
Can you a bit closer, maybe?
Is that better?
Yeah.
Sounds ever so loud here. Yeah. Yes, so the first of our reports is the progress report. So this shows the progress against the internal audit plan for 21-22. Obviously, the plan for 22-23 is later on the agenda today. So since the last Audit and Governance Committee, we've issued a further 3 draft reports, and 2 other reports also remain in draft. So that's a total of 5 reports which are in draft. So there are no further draft reports to be issued for 21-22, but obviously we're working with management to get those finalised. There are also 2 further draft reports which were ad hoc reviews which we were asked to undertake, and we've included them in the progress report for transparency so that you can see the additional work that we're undertaking as well. That is pretty much all I was going to say on the progress report, because there are no final reports to run through, but if there are any questions, happy to take them.
Thank you. I mean, our colleagues, our role is here is to receive and note the progress report. Thank you, Anna. We'll move on then to item 7, which is the annual report.
So I'll take this one, Chair, if that's okay. So the purpose of the annual report, it's a requirement under the Public Sector Internal Audit Standards that the Head of Internal Audit provides the committee with an opinion, an annual opinion for 21-22, and that opinion is to cover the risk management, the governance and the control framework. So this paper presents you with that opinion. The important first point to note is that this is a draft report, and the reason that it's a draft report is for the reasons that Anna has just outlined in the progress report, in that a series of our audit reports from last year still remain in draft. And so it is possible that as we finalise them with management, that the opinions in those reports may change. But what we're bringing you here is a draft annual Head of Internal Audit opinion based on the status of the work as at now, but with the proviso that, as I said, that some of that work is in draft. So the key page for you to focus on is page 143 of the pack, where we actually give the opinion, and the opinion is that there are weaknesses in the framework of governance, risk and internal control such that it could become inadequate and ineffective. So if you then look at page 150 of the pack, Appendix A, we show there the various opinions that we are able to provide you as a committee. And you will see that there are 4 possible opinions, and the opinion that I've just read out is the 3rd one down. And to be clear, it is a below the line opinion, so it's seen as a negative or qualified opinion, but it's not the very lowest level. So naturally you will want to know, well, why have you arrived at a negative or qualified opinion for the authority? So if we just take you through that, and I'll summarise basically what the report is saying. So one of the areas that we've got to opine on is risk management. The situation in 21-22 was that we were planning to do a piece of work. In the previous year, you may recall, 2021, we issued a partial assurance opinion for risk management. So that was a negative opinion. We were planning to do a piece of work. We were asked not to do that assurance piece of work because very limited progress had been made in implementing the actions from the previous year's work. And obviously what we've just heard from a previous agenda item is that some consultancy work has been done and actions are now in the process of being implemented in developing a new risk management framework. But for the year in question, we were concerned that there was an inadequate risk management framework based on our work for the previous year and little progress having been made. On the governance side, you will see that in the report, our work in 21-22 actually focused on subsidiary governance. That report is still in draft. So, as I said earlier, the opinion could possibly change. But as it stands at the moment, that is a minimal assurance opinion, a negative assurance opinion. And so that obviously influences our governance opinion. But we've also naturally taken into account the work on governance that we've just heard in detail earlier on the agenda, and also considered the potential impact of this that it may have on the external auditor's value for money opinion. So we've taken that into account, the views of other assurances that you've received as a committee. On the control side of things, there have been 4 audits that we've done that have had a reasonable assurance opinion, positive opinion. So that's, on some balance, that there's some positive there, some work that we've done with positive opinion. And also our follow-up work has concluded with a reasonable progress opinion on the implementation of agreed management action. So again, that's a positive side that we're bringing into our overall consideration. We have also, though, taken note of the follow-up work that we did on the IT control framework audit from, again, 2021, which had, again, a minimal assurance and negative opinion piece of work. And we conducted 2 follow-up pieces of work on that during the year. The most recent one, which again is still in draft, showed that there was still a high priority action and a medium priority action that hadn't been implemented, and there were 2 medium priority actions that had only partially been implemented. So further work needed to be done in that particular area to move that control framework on in line with the agreed actions. And then finally, we did also conduct a number of advisory reviews. And so although they're advisory reviews and don't necessarily come with an assurance opinion, we can't ignore the findings of that work. And we will take that into account when we're looking at the opinion. There was one piece of work in particular that we've taken note of, and that was the work that we've done on government procurement card, expenditure and expenses. That report, again, it's still in draft, but there are 6 high priority management actions agreed that we're discussing with management on that one, and a medium priority one. Still in draft, but again, for the purposes of this draft report, we've taken that into account. So in the report, we highlight a number of those areas where we think, based on our work, that they're areas that you should consider for inclusion in your annual governance statement. So when we pull all of this together, we've come up with the overall negative opinion. I think, just to be clear, even leaving aside the opinions that you've received on governance and the external auditor's view, we would have been minded still to have issued a negative opinion just based on the internal audit work that we've done around our conclusions on risk management, around governance, and around the lack of implementation on the IT control framework, and the findings, the draft findings at the moment on the procurement card. I'll pause at that point and take any questions on that.
Colleagues? Silence. Should we have seen this coming? Should you have told us earlier that this was coming?
A good question, and it's one when Dan briefed me yesterday before he went on holiday. I asked him exactly the same question, and I think the issue for us is around the timing of the audits. That, as you'll have seen from the progress report that Anna's just briefed, that a large amount of the work was done in the last quarter of the year, and a large percentage of the work has not yet been finalised, and so it's difficult for us to have said that this was coming.
And when we were talking earlier about the main point of effort for us, which is in the improvement work, which is to return the insurances or to receive assurances from auditors that the Get Well programme is moving apace and effectively, what view should we take of that? When you'll be finalising this report for our next meeting, is that the intention?
So our actions are to obviously agree the work that is in draft at the moment, and then to finalise this report. We would hope to get that through to the next meeting. You know, it should be done earlier than that, but the very latest you should see it as the next meeting. From my perspective, you know, from the internal audit angle, what we're looking to see is there's a series of reports there that have got less than favourable opinions. We would be looking to see actions implemented in the same way that you're looking to see your overall improvement plan implemented. We would be looking to see some real evidence that there's a continual improvement, that the internal audit agreed management actions are being taken seriously, that the audit committee is, you know, taking responsibility for asking management, are these being done, and seeing them through to conclusion.
Okay. And how common is such an audit opinion?
So we do a huge amount of internal auditing in the not-for-profit sector, and I would say probably less than 5% of our head of internal audit annual opinions are negative.
I think that would be an insight would be helpful in your final report to make where we are, the significance that it's a couple of standard deviations away. I don't know. Do we have a?
We can put a comment around a little bit of benchmarking in that area if that would help you.
Yes, please. Do officers CPCA wish to give a reaction to this forthcoming qualified opinion? You've left Jodie in the hot seat.
Just to say that I think one of the things picked up myself from sort of changing my role recently is sometimes a delay in getting management responses back to RSM in regards to getting to the point where we have agreed final reports. And that is something we'll definitely be looking to pick up moving forward. And obviously there are implications there around our own staffing numbers and so on that contribute to that. But other than that, just to say, I think it's as expected.
Thank you, Jodie. But I mean, I do think that main point of effort for us is to slightly better than you're hoping to get the answers in on time. I mean, we want to see the focus appropriately in it, threading your way through all the other hundreds of things that have to go on at the juncture we found us. I'll allow the.
I was just going to pick up on the monitoring of implementation of actions point. The Performance and Risk Committee, which is an officer committee, regularly at every meeting receives an update on the progress against the actions identified. And that is something that could quite easily be brought to the Audit and Governance Committee so that you are continuously cited throughout the year on the management response to the audits and our implementation of those actions, if that's something the committee would appreciate.
I think it's always a challenge to how much detail we have on a one-to-one, and when we get the assurance, I think I would rather be. I don't see any alternative coming out. I'd rather be looking to you, not the CPCA assuring us that the actions are being done, but for convincing the internal auditors so that they can tell us that it's being done. That's where the assurance comes from. But thank you for that.
Yeah, Chair, could I? I'm not quite sure how to attract your attention. Could I just ask a question? It was about, I mean, our colleague from Internal Audit said a lot of the work had been done late in the year. And I was just wondering what, why that was and what the impact of that was.
Could I give RSN the floor now, both to answer the interim chief executive's question, and what, you had a comment anyway?
I was going to comment anyway, and it's linked, very much linked to that particular point. I haven't got the visibility about the timing of it because I'm just standing in for Dan about why it was back-ended. And are you able to give any comment on that?
Yeah, in some instances we were asked to do the audits a bit later, I think due to management capacity. And in some instances, some of these audits were agreed later, particularly some of the additional audits that we have done. It was springtime, getting towards the year end when they were actually agreed in the first place. So just circumstances mean that a lot of the audits were done later on in the year.
So the point I wanted to make is that the next item on the agenda is the plan for the current year. What the advice that I would give you is that we want to get the work done as soon as we can, and realistically the management can accommodate it, picking up on the finance point, and get management actions agreed quickly, get reports finalised. The reason for that is that if there's anything negative in there, it's better to know sooner rather than later, because then you've got a fighting chance within the year to take some action, for us to see that you've taken action, to get some assurance, and to reflect that in our annual opinion at the end of the next year. So we can say, yes, although we did a negative report on whatever it was in September, by the time we got through to March, action had been taken, management had addressed it really quickly, we've got evidence it's taken it, and it has less impact on the annual opinion then because you've corrected it during the year. If everything's done in March, you can't do anything about it. It's a negative opinion and it's too late. So that would be my advice when we get on to the next agenda item, is to get things done early. Don't push it back in the back end of the year because it will impact you.
Thank you. I think I don't think it was in this. This was the second year I think RSM have been our second year. You've been our internal auditors. The first year they took the timing was difficult about when they became our internal auditors, and there was a lot of back end loading for the previous financial year. This year it wasn't the intention to back end load, but management did put a number of extra pieces of work on the external auditors, and there has been creeping slippage. And I think that reminder that it's in the best interests of management to get this stuff done in a timely fashion. It is a useful lesson, but it is always tricky. I know. I've got another point now from Simon.
Yes, thank you. I have to say it's refreshing to hear an auditor give advice, and I really appreciate that. I thought what you said was very helpful, and I hope that's recorded in the minutes. Can I just then turn to the point that you've made and the practicalities around it? Because under our next item, we've got core areas for 22-23, and it is quite a substantial workload. And I'm concerned that if we're to follow your advice and address the areas of concern as soon as possible, we're going to find ourselves in the same position, not been able to deliver on the full programme for 22-23. So given the capacity constraints that we know about, are we overloading ourselves or about to overload ourselves and just roll over the problem into another financial year? You know, in fact, have we got the capacity to get the capacity is probably the question.
There's a bit of eating our sandwiches before lunch of the next agenda item, but I think we might pause here once you've had a comment to answer that and finish this agenda item, and then go and have a sandwich, and maybe with that doability in mind when we get to the next item. But would you like any?
So I think the doability question is a very valid one, given what we've just been discussing earlier on the agenda around ability to respond to change, and I think it's one for management. This is a management capacity issue. We can deliver the work. It's more around management's ability to cope with audit, to be able to respond to whatever actions we think need agreeing and actually implement it and provide evidence of implementation. So this is a management capacity issue, I think.
Okay, I'll draw that item 7 to a close. We are grateful for the candid insight into what is a disappointing message, and recognise that it's to the advantage to get internal audit work requirements met from a management point of view, and that is not always on a normal day-to-day an easy thing to expect, but given where the combined authority is, the emphasis on management meeting the internal audit requirements is more important than it's been hitherto, to help provide this committee with the assurances that things that are broke are being fixed in a timely and effective manner. And the other item we've turned to after we have a 20-minute break. We'll come to the internal audit plan. Thank you. You're going to have a sandwich, Gordon, but I'd be grateful if you could stay with us, particularly on the governance statement. Well, both the governance statement and the trading companies are both things which I'm sure we'll have some debate on, which we might find useful to have you there. Thank you. So, where are we? Well, not quite 20 minutes, 12:15. Complete with indigestion. We took an extra 5 minutes, but then we were doing quite well. So it's 12:20 and we're still going to aim to finish by 2. So if we could reconvene the meeting, please. If we could reconvene for starting. No jollifications allowed. Right. We're now moving on to item 8, which is the internal audit plan 22-23, with the injunction in our mind about doability. Right. RSM, if you would introduce your proposals.
Thank you, Chair. So this plan has been put together, as is our usual practice, based on using your risk register as the starting point, and we've used the updated version of the corporate risk register, which is one of the reasons why the plan is a bit later coming to you than would be normal practice, because we were waiting for that work to be done on the risk register so that we could then make sure that our internal audit coverage during the year linked to those risks, so that you're getting assurance over those risks. So you can see that we have linked in section 2 the audits that have gone into the plan to those risks. We also obviously discussed the areas for coverage with senior management, as well as linking to risks, just to make sure that we're covering the right areas. And obviously we don't want to be duplicating assurance that you're receiving from elsewhere as well. We've included a review of risk management governance. As we were talking about earlier, we haven't done a full review of risk management since 2020-21. But we know there's been a lot of work done recently on that, and the actions are continuing to be implemented. So there will be a risk management review and governance. It makes sense, given the issues that you're facing currently, to include some allowance for governance, a governance audit within the plan that can be scoped nearer to the time. And I think the other thing that I'd emphasise about this whole plan is that it is flexible. We want to make sure that we can respond to your assurance needs, and as you develop the improvement plan and start to roll that out, there may be areas that you want us to look at that may feed into some of these areas that are already in the plan. For instance, succession planning may well fit in with some of the actions from the improvement plan, or we can talk about swapping audits in and out. So although these are the audits at the moment that we've agreed with management to include, and we're looking for your approval of that, it does remain flexible. You already mentioned about the timing and of the audits and the doability of the plan. As Mark said, that's going to depend on management's capacity to a certain extent. Obviously, the plan is coming to you later than planned, not just because of the development of the risk register, but also because of the agenda for the previous Audit and Governance Committee meeting being too big to accommodate the plan. So it is a bit later. But we have already commenced one of the audits with the agreement of management, and that's the data protection deep dive. So we have already commenced work, but obviously still a lot to do. And we would, following approval of the plan, obviously look to get going as soon as possible with scoping the work in detail and undertaking it. Just also want to point out Appendix B, which shows the internal audit strategy over the last few years and the coming years, so that you can see where the plan for this year fits in terms of the assurance that you're getting from that third line of assurance provided by internal audit. And I will take any questions.
Thank you, Anna. Comments, questions? We are asked to consider and approve today, so it's we need to bear that in mind. David Brown.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a couple of comments. Firstly, we heard earlier on that the energy hub is now called the Net Zero Hub. Can we try and get some consistency in papers so that I know what we're talking about? Also, in the sort of third bullet point in the page 159, under core assurance, the Affordable Homes Programme, I understand from the local press that Overview and Scrutiny have announced they're going to do some work on the affordable homes programme. I'm just concerned from what we've heard about management capacity, etc., that the internal audit need to be working in tandem with ONS on that. Otherwise, the same officers are going to be asked to be providing the same information, which is just, to me, duplication and a waste of people's time. So can we just have some joined up thinking if we've got two sets of inquiries into the affordable homes programme going on?
Is there a comment from officers about on the second point, which is the affordable homes programme, and having us asking questions and overview and scrutiny? Is the harmonisation of that?
Yeah, so overview and scrutiny have, as mentioned, commissioned their own investigation, is not the right word, looking into the affordable housing programme. I believe it's mostly rearward looking at how it was done rather than forward looking how it's being closed out. So they are slightly different scopes. That said, it's a very valid point that it will be the same, basically 3 officers who would need to respond to both. So we may need to have a discussion around the timing of that to ensure that they're either sequential, or if one is covering the issues of the others, how much assurance RSM can take from the work that's done for ONS, or indeed vice versa, depending on which turns out to be primary.
And we had before lunch Simon's comment about capacity generally, bearing in mind the nature, and when we have governance TBC, what is the, and we've heard from RSM that they're resourced, that was my understanding of their answers previously. So this is a capacity issue for management and an appetite for getting work done, maybe the volume of which we're not necessarily aware of. I mean, what's your reaction to this challenge?
The reaction to the challenge in regards to the governance TBC, I mean, there'll be elements and opportunities that come out of the improvement plan, and we can work closely, obviously, with the internal auditors on their role moving forward on that. And in regards to capacity, we're also aware from a governance perspective that we obviously need to have a think about how we support governance and the governance function within the combined authority moving forward, and noting, of course, that our SLA arrangements with the County Council come to an end at the end of 2022. So these are all things that we're obviously aware of and we are planning for. But we do look forward to working with the internal auditors once we have more clarity on the improvement plan, to see which elements they can best support us with in regards to governance moving forward. There's a lot of things for us to pick up following board consideration this week in regard to responding and implementing elements of the review of governance as well. That will obviously feed into the improvement plan and things we can do immediately, quick wins.
The immediate outlook, are we fiddling whilst Rome burns? That's where we are at the moment with this plan. If you embark on all this activity, or the preparatory activity, the agreeing of the scope between the directors, I mean, all of this is even before the internal auditors start their work, isn't it? Because you have to agree the scopes. Do we know enough at the moment to say that approving a plan today is going to be viable, or should we, what we started off with, the one on IT, we agreed that sometime back before the full plan was going to be with us? Is there a step-by-step need at in this unusual year, or should we say this is the course, and we'll just make space for governance and improvement? There's a range of choices there, aren't there? Does anybody have any views? David?
Nobody else is going to go. And Andy did say in her introduction that this is flexible, so I think if we look at it that way, as it is a flexible plan.
Okay.
and just accept it's going to change as the year goes on, as things become known. And we might need to be asking them to change their priorities.
Okay. On timelines for governance, sorry, Simon.
I just don't want to see this problem recurring, and I think there's a risk by. The question is there a risk in accepting this programme and committing to deliver against it? Can a judgment be made? Is there the management capacity to repair the issues that internal audit have identified? Which are the justification for, or the rationale for their opinion as of 31st of March this year, and to deliver against this programme without running into trouble with them again for failing to have worked through the programme with a sufficient quality, detail, timeliness, and so on. So I don't think we're in a position to prescribe at this point what should happen. I think we need to have a proposal from the management team, setting out their proposals for it in the context of the opinion that's been given, and the need to. I think what we said, you know, giving auditors assurances that we're following credible action, so that they can change their opinion of us. And that's what I'm concerned that we need to be doing. So don't let's embark on this without having further advice from management as to what they can deliver on. That's my position on this.
If we look at the timelines, if we took a sort of, we don't want to lose time. If we take the improvement journey, the next thing is going to be in the September, the outcome of the self-assessment and the beginning to turn an action plan. And then that will take a bit to digest. So we look at these dates. There are things in September, there are two things in September on the plan for working, and the others then in October. When do we meet again? When do we meet? September. Okay. And as far as the headlines that are covered in this plan, I sense that these are the right things, and that anything that contributes to improvement of the governance process has to be more important than anything else, given the conversations we had earlier today. So could we take stock at our next meeting, encouraging management to take a realistic view as to what they're able to deliver, and emerging priorities as the improvement action plan takes place as to which way you play these topics, and get on with the first two in September now, and have a look again when we meet again in September. Ian, sorry, you were going to say something.
Find one that works. That one's on now. Oh, it's on. That one. Right. Lovely. Yeah. I mean, I think we've got to give this a chance to work. We've given instructions. We are not the people that do the audit work. We are guided by the auditors, and we make decisions based on the reports that come before us. At the last meeting, when we were discussing the process at which we were, which way we were going to try and bring the improvements about that need to be done, we've set that, and it's very early days. We've got to give that process a chance, and we've got to get the auditors to do some of the work. And I think if we get too involved, we'd be micromanaging it, and we need the auditors to do their work and report back to us, because we work on the reports, we don't do the work. And I think that would be there. We're 2 months away from having the next meeting, and by that time we will have the reports back, and then we can analyse those and have a look at it from there.
Okay, thank you, Ian. I think we're all on the same pages. So the topics covered agreed. The need for flexibility as improvement action emerges. The priority that needs to be given to work which focuses on, that helps the improvement journey is more important than other things. The need for management to really look at what they're capable of doing in order to meet the timelines. Get ahead, go on with the plan as written and take stock in our next meeting, looking for advice on the auditors and management of what is doable in the circumstances. Okay. Are you happy with that? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've got to give this process time to run, and if the work that's being done is working, then that's good. If it's not, then there are other processes and there are other steps that can and will be taken to rectify where we're going wrong, and there'll be external parts that will be coming to us to look at us and put us right if it's not running properly. It's got to run a process, and I think the process that we're looking at really is the auditor's report, give them a chance to find out where we're going wrong, put it right, and if that process, if we come back in September and there isn't the changes that I would like to see by the end of September, or the shoots of change, I think then we'd be looking at having probably external people come in to look at, because that was an option that was on the table to us last meeting, and I think events will then overtake where we go. And I think this to me is the right course of action. We've set the process running, let it run, because there'll be short term, medium term, and long term goals within this, and it will be a long process to turn this round. But we've got to give it a chance to run to allow that change to happen.
Thank you, Ian. So yeah, okay. I think sorry, RSM.
Yes, I think I understand exactly where everyone's coming from. I think the one risk I'd just like to highlight that I wouldn't want to materialise is we get to a position where management can't respond, we can't do the work, we get to the 31st of March next year, and we have to give an opinion that we can't give an opinion because we haven't done enough work. And then the question comes up, have you had an effective internal audit service for the year because they haven't done enough work? And we really don't want to be in that position where you're having to face that hurdle as well.
And I think we would all agree with that, and that clearly puts the onus on yourselves to raise the flag if it's not going as reasonably as you should, and that for management to jolly well deliver. Okay.
To come back on that point, I think we've given RSM the flexibility to highlight those kind of things that are coming to us anyway. And if you feel it's not right, then that is the very kind of thing that management is not dealing with this. We need early warnings of that to reassess where we go with that. So throwing that ball back in your court a little bit, as much as we need to make the decisions, you need to give us the information to make those decisions with, and you've got the flexibility to do that. And I think that's what I'm saying is about letting the process run, is allowing you to do your job to make that process work.
Yeah, totally agree.
Okay, I think we're all agreed. Slightly different words used around the table, but
yep.
Flexible, openness, get on with it. Right, thank you. Now on to item 9, which is the narrative report and the annual governance statement. And you will see in the papers that the numbers are not available. I was consulted regarding the fact that the key person in assembling the numbers is not available. So that allowing that to slow down was with my informal agreement. So we are to note the draft narrative report and learn about when we're going to get the numbers.
Thank you, Chair. You already expressed to the committee the reasons behind it. There was a sudden illness in the finance team, unfortunately. and they are the critical lead person on pulling it together. These are here to note, we're advised by external auditors that the narrative report at the front, which normally makes the front part of the accounts, should be reflective and focus on the delivery of the authority in 21-22 and make reference to the annual governance statement where the governance issues that were highlighted by our external auditors are then gone into in more detail. So if anyone thought the narrative statement may not have that much detail about the governance issues, that is deliberate and in line with the recommendations we were provided with. The documents are one part of the statements as a whole, and they'll need to be updated as we go forward to ensure they remain consistent with the financial statements and the emerging improvement plan. The one positive of the delay to the draft accounts being ready is that we'll be able to update these statements to reflect the agreed plan on Wednesday and the emerging work as it comes forward under Gordon. And so we would hope that when we come to present the draft full accounts to the committee, and we're aiming for the September meeting, these will, while you're seeing the bones of them, certainly the annual governance statement will have been updated with a clearer forward-looking objectives of what we're going to achieve in the forthcoming year to address what has been identified as weaknesses. I did want to just comment on the most of the draft annual governance statement was completed before we received the draft opinion from RSM, which is why the items they ask us to specifically address in the annual governance statement have not currently been addressed in the annual governance statement. And again, I can assure the committee that they will be in the next draft. In terms of timing, as I say, we are taking active steps to get an interim resource in place to cover the sickness absence and hope to have the full accounts with you at your September meeting. The audit of those accounts was always scheduled for November by EY, and so there's no impact on that timeline, and so the final accounts should be prepared at the same time as was always the plan.
Comments, anybody? In some regards, because so much is going to change, it's it did struck me though that there is when I read it and I thought, hang on, everything's going on all around here, but reminding the reader that this was about then and not now would be helpful, it seems to me. But equally, you have to make some clear statements about what has emerged or how it affects the future. And I didn't feel it managed to do either of those things. But then I recognise that this is work in progress. I did have, still don't see any comments. I did have a thing though on the annual governance statement, whereas I've lost my page now. But it says in there that we, the Audit Committee, approve it. And I always had difficulty with a non-executive committee approving things. So I did go back to our terms of reference, and we don't approve it. There's a masterpiece of drafting. Review the annual, this is from our terms of reference, review the annual government statement, prior to approval to ensure, horrible word, it properly reflects the risk environment and supporting assurances. Now, whoever wrote that deserves a prize, don't they? Because it's not quite clear. But I don't think the Audit Committee approves the annual government statement. I think it's signed off by the Chief Executive and somebody else, is it not?
So the annual governance statement itself is signed off by the lead politician of an organisation, which is the mayor for us, of course, and the chief executive of the organisation. The statement of accounts which incorporate it are signed off by this committee. So that's probably why there's such weaselly words in there.
Yeah, well, I
you do, but not
do
as an
think
individual document.
We need to make clear that we have reviewed it. The accounts, that is quite clear. That's our job to do that. But what is in an annual government statement, we are not competent or close enough to understand what's going on. So when it comes back to us, could you resolve that dilemma? Because I don't like signing for things which we're not, or approving things which we're not in a position to approve. I've got David Brown.
Thank you, Chairman. I was pleased to hear, this is still work in progress, but there are some corrections that need to be made when somebody has a look at it. Just as an example, on page 186 of our pack, second sentence in our key achievements, we've received funding confirmation that following completion of a successful Cambridge South business case by the CA, government has the project will be funded. Is that the Cambridge South railway station we're talking about? Or some development in Cambridge South? Somebody needs to look at this with a different set of eyes, I suggest. And on page 195 in the Audit and Governance Committee bit, there's a second sentence which I believe is not needed, because it refers to yourself, Chairman, as being in the opening paragraph comprises 7 elected members and an independent person who chairs the meetings, and then 3 sentences below, the Audit and Governance Committee has an independent chair who was reappointed for a second period. It's almost like somebody's being paid by the word.
I can think I found one where on page 204, internal audit, and to take a review of the effectiveness of internal audit and of the systems of internal control. So, yeah, there's a lot of critical analysis done when you put it together for the next time. And the next time will be our next meeting.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I'm sure if officers wanted to circulate the narrative beforehand informally to members to see if they've got any advice when it's been reworked, and if that would be helpful, we'd be happy to do it. But equally, we don't want to draft by committee. Okay. Simon wants to draft by committee.
Chair, I think I heard you say that this report doesn't really fully reflect the state of the combined authority at the present moment.
No, sorry, I'll correct that. What I said was, when I first read it, that's what I thought, and then I was reminded of myself that it's a timing difference, and that the report should make that clear to the reader.
Thank you.
That this should not be taken as because as it goes in the public domain at some stage, well, it is now, it looks as if we're just not taking any notice. No, we're not taking any notice. The CPCA is not taking any notice.
Yeah.
So that's what I meant to say, even if I didn't say it.
Thank you for clarifying that. I just dropped off asleep a moment, realising that this is for previous financial year. However, it's quite common practice in the commercial sector for the chair of the board of directors to report on post-year developments. And I think if there was some section on that, and there are references to this, the post-year developments in here, but I think it would be helpful to overcome that criticism, so that we could point to, no, well, actually, we are demonstrating awareness of what's happening in this authority, and this isn't just a bland whitewash, and when we kind of like burying the really bad stuff here.
Okay,
I just think that would be
a very
really
helpful way of describing it, much better than my disclaimer, but what did you say?
Post end of year development.
Post end of year developments. That does need to be in there in some form or another. Okay, thank you. Shall we move on? Yep. This is the one I particularly was grateful that Gordon is able to listen in, which is the local authority trading companies, in which Robert Fox, there we are, Robert Fox, welcome. And the report is for noting. And I'll let you introduce it, and then I'll get grumpy, okay? Can't hear you, Robert.
How about now? You can hear me?
We can.
Brilliant. Fabulous, fabulous. So thank you, Chair, and good afternoon to you and to members. So this is an update report, as you rightly say, to the committee following the previous report that was presented in January on the combined authorities subsidiary companies. So noting your earlier comments, Chair, apologies for some of the regurgitation of the previous report in terms of background. I felt it did feel pertinent to include some of the previous information due to the committee having a number of new members and ensuring that they are well informed with regard to the companies. Also, the committee will ascertain why the exam question has not necessarily been fully answered at the conclusion of my introduction here. So at that January meeting, a terms of reference for the committee was agreed in relation to the review and assessment of the authorities trading companies, and these are set out as a background in the as a reminder in the report itself. So the combined authority still has 6 trading companies, but the One Cam Limited company should be struck off the register at Companies House by the end of the summer. And also consideration is being given to the closure of the 2 Angle companies, as neither has effectively traded for around the last 18 months. As it says in the report, the subsidiary company secretariat function is now delivered by an expert company secretary team at legal firm Travers Hamlin. And as part of this contract, which goes on until April of next year, Travers Hamlin will deliver 2 director training sessions. They have, following an initial review of the company's statutory registers, identified some minor administrative issues and omissions, and these have now been rectified. These related to some of the statutory filings at Companies House. So as I mentioned there, members might ascertain why the exam question's not fully been answered. And the reason for this is RSM have been undertaking an internal audit of the governance of the subsidiary companies. And this audit will be presented to the committee at a meeting in the near future. So I do not want to anticipate the key findings from that audit, but it is known that some of the functions outlined within the company shareholder agreements are not necessarily being adhered to in terms of the reporting of the management and performance of the subsidiaries. And this is something that will need to be rectified by providing the combined authority board regular updates. There is also some turnover in directors within the subsidiaries, and therefore some up-to-date signatures on the shareholder agreements is another immediate issue which can be addressed. So as you stated in your introduction, Chair, the members are recommended to note this update, and it might be, given the RSM audit, that some members wish to keep their powder dry on specific questions until they're in receipt of the internal audit report at a future meeting. So I'm happy to take comment and any other questions.
Well done, Robert, for ducking my grumpiness partially. David Brown.
Thank you, Chairman. Do people not talk to each other? I mean, here we've got on the same agenda, in the same agenda papers, an RSM report that says there's limited assurance, and yet this, in these subsidiary companies, and yet this report, which actually follows on the agenda from what we've already been told, doesn't even mention it.
You didn't dodge David Brown's grumpiness. Any other comments?
Noted.
I think the exam question was much wider than that. Because, and my grumpiness came from the fact that a large part of this, as your words, was regurgitating from the past, which is fine, because we have new members, but it doesn't answer any of the things in our, no, sorry, it doesn't answer the interesting things in our newly defined terms of reference. To provide review and challenge of the combined authority's governance of its trading companies and the appointments to the boards of the companies. And the paper starts, I'm sorry, I'm a bit sorry for being so grumpy, but it really quite excited me when I read it. He said to provide information on the governance status. It doesn't do that, in my opinion. And when we've been on this journey now for 18 months, I think, within the Audit Committee, we've been trying to learn about these things in a way which doesn't interfere with the purpose of the companies, before Ian Benny goes at me, about how they run their business. But we do want to know how the combined authority governs this relationship. And I'm not sure this helps us in that furtherance of understanding. I'm sure the audit report, when we see it, will help. But new members may have different opinion, but last year it was all about us trying to learn more about how this thing is set up from a combined authority point of view. And how does the combined authority can satisfy itself, whatever it needs to satisfy, by the nature of why they brought the company into life and what governance controls they have. And I don't see any of that in here. And we still do need to know, and it is a priority for our year. Maybe it might not be as big a priority now in the short term, given the improvement journey, but it's still a priority because we still don't know. Sorry to be so unhelpful, Robert, but we do need something better.
That's actually very helpful, Chair, and I do think, as you referred to there, I think the report from RSM will highlight some of those issues, and therefore, as I say, maybe keep powders dry until you receive that report.
Any other comments? Whatever the report is from RSM, it is incumbent on the authority to put in context all the things that we've asked for. It isn't the responsibility of the auditors. So grumpiness will prevail until these questions are answered.
Yeah, thank you, John. Yeah, I think you've summed it up quite well. It doesn't cover the points that we should be looking at, but I'll just reiterate for the new members, I have concerns that the combined authority was trying to micromanage these companies, which I didn't agree with. These companies are set up for a purpose, and that is to deliver, and we shouldn't be micromanaging companies. They are there for the purpose, and we've got to allow them to do what they need to do to deliver. I said it before, I'll say this for the newer members of the committee. We really should be looking at the relationship between the combined authority and the companies and how that relationship works rather than the companies themselves.
Okay, yeah, and I don't think we know whether we micromanage them because we've never seen what the management arrangements are. So
Never had the chance to micromanage them. I think this is important because it's one of the factors that we've just heard contributed to the opinion from the internal auditors. Governance arrangements for the subsidiary companies, number 2 on the list. So I think what we need to hear from Robert is, how's that going to be addressed?
Not today. I've got some advice on my right, which I think might be helpful. We'll be seeing your report at the next meeting on trading companies.
Yeah, it should be coming through to the September meeting.
And Jodie?
Trading company governance is obviously not part of the remit of the review of governance, but the review of governance did involve obviously mapping out the governance, both formal and informal, of the combined authority, which places me in a position where I could very quickly map out the governance of trading companies. As from a combined authority perspective, I could do that piece of work with Robert, and we could report to the next meeting in regards to what that currently is, maybe even what perhaps it should be best practice wise, and obviously then you'll have the internal audit report as well to take on board, which might obviously put you in a better position of understanding where we are, and a better position then to be able to consider the internal audit report.
Thank you. I think Mafeking is relieved, and those two things then will take us on the journey. Robert, thank you for putting up with my grumpiness as usual, and we'll see you next time we meet. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, members.
Okay. And thank you, Gordon, for listening into that, because it's been a worry for a long time for us to try and get our minds around what, and we know that it's a high risk area for local authorities when their arrangements with subsidiary companies. So that's why we're trying to keep on the case. We're just about to go to our last item, which is our work program. I don't know whether, Gordon, you had anything you'd like to share with us, having sat through the meeting?
It's a very open-ended offer, isn't it? Yeah. I guess, what do I take from this meeting? I mean, clearly, in terms of the business of the meeting, you know, there's a real mix of noting work in progress, but rather a lot, I think, maybe unclear about whether some of the work is assigned to priorities, as was discussed in the committee, particularly internal work. So I take those comments about flexibility and flex away with me on that. I think my overall feeling is a hugely packed agenda, which maybe constrains the ability to drill down on some of the issues that you might want to. And I think that's a bit of a feature from this is the third formal meeting I've been in this week, and it's felt like that in every single one. And maybe that's just a manifestation of the organizational culture that just to keep feeding the beast from reduced and restrained officer capacity is a short-term answer to the harder task of putting things right. So I think there's a balance between, you know, meeting the governance requirements, but absolutely giving priority to make some of the changes that put things right. I guess that's my feeling.
Thank you very much for letting me put you on the spot. Now go to the work programme, the last item. There's always a danger with the last item, but we're all ready to go home. I particularly welcome any new eyes that have a look at the work programme, either now or to let Joe and me know if you think we've got the right things on the work programme. And I noted when I went through it that we have one meeting that says it's a reserve meeting. Yes, the January the 27th, it says reserve. I think I could propose that we delete reserve from that date. I don't think there's been any shortage of things to do. David?
No, Chair, I'm just not sure whether we were expecting the member officer protocol to come back after the last meeting, or whether it was going, because it was going to be rewritten, but...
So at your last meeting, you approved the version of the member officer protocol to go to board. Board have considered that, but you also tasked us with coming back to you within 6 months with wider views on enhancing that protocol further, a specific section in regards to social media protocol with guidance as well, not just a protocol. And it may be that we also need to pull together guidance around the actual member officer engagements and having a view about all of those documents in the context of the code of conduct. So the expectation from my perspective is that we will be doing that with you within the next 6 months.
Yeah, it's on the 27th of January currently.
Yeah, I just wasn't sure whether we were going to see the one that went to board or not.
No. Simon.
So I don't know whether this needs to be updated with some of the actions that have been agreed this morning, this afternoon, about the internal audit plan taking stock point that came up from item 8, and the review of the Combined Authorities governance of the trading companies came under item 10, and then earlier in the meeting we were talking about our own improvement plan as this committee, which would be coming up in December. And then I'm looking at the agenda for that December meeting, and it's like a World Championships 10,000 meter race stacked. And I'm just wondering whether some of those items could slip to the reserve meeting on the 27th, just so we get a bit of balance. And then I look at the reserve. That reserve meeting's already got a huge number of items against it, I think.
Yeah, that's helpful. And what I do is when we've got the outcome of the minutes, and we try and smooth this and put it in the next round.
Yeah.
In previous years, I've sought. Sorry, Anna. Okay, I've sought views about how we could improve ourselves, and there's not been a natural instinct to come forward on these matters, so I tend to try and pluck them out of business. And I would think that the what we can now call in the lessons learnt from the external auditor's intervention, I'll talk with officers with a view to having an informal development session. We can do these online now, so that we can kick it around a bit before we get something that comes into the formal meeting. So with those thoughts in mind, we'll smooth it. And I always thought it was interesting, the interim chief executive, is there too much, and therefore we never get down to the detail. On the other hand, our road has got to be kept a bit strategic. So but when in doubt, say there's a human reflex with committees when something comes, we'll put it on the work plan. So we should be taking stuff off as well when we can, if it isn't a regulatory or statutory requirement. But yeah, that's helpful. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. I just wondered, I can't remember exactly what the JULAC communication said, but are we still aiming that they would come and talk to us at some point?
I admitted to go back to that. We would put, if we can put an action for us to have an update at our next, an oral piece of advice. I don't see any point in pressing the test when we've been advised that we've got a leadership turmoil and there'll be some rethinking. Unless members feel otherwise, pressing them at this juncture doesn't seem profitable. And getting somebody to tell us how they did it somewhere else is probably not profitable either at this juncture. Yeah, but thank you for reminding me of that. I'm very grateful.
You said we'd come back and reflect on JULAC's advice for us to hear what Peterborough had done. And I've heard what your view on it, Chair, but I'm just wondering whether actually jumping through that hoop might be a politic thing to do, that we're listening to you and not ignoring you. Whether we regard whether we'll gain any much from it is mute, but almost I think developing that relationship with DULUC on that particular point might be worthwhile. I leave it to your discretion, but I just wanted to put that in your mind as when you're reflecting on that.
Okay, well, I'll if we can wrap that extra sentiment that we could recognise about if we're going to establish a relation, feel it valued to have some relationship, we ought to bear that in mind. If you can capture that point, though remember, I'm not a politician. So. You were going to say something.
Yeah, it was just a point on the work plan, whether you wanted to add the final annual report from internal audit to the September meeting, and also looking ahead to next year, the internal audit plan for 23-24, maybe to the January meeting, and that would mean that we get a head start on the approval for that, and it will prevent that being back-ended as well.
I think we definitely need your final report at the next meeting. Is that what you said?
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, yes, because we need to get that done. If the view of yourselves and officers is discussing 23-24 is helpful in January, then short and sweet, let's do that. Yeah, I see that's everybody's. We'll add that to the list of jobs. Anything else? No, the financing.
Actually, has nothing to do with finance. I just wanted to pass something on from our head of comms, who's clearly listening in reflection on an earlier comment about not feeling engaged with the combined authority. There should be a monthly newsletter now coming out to all councillors in the area, starting from later today, I believe, to set out a regular update on what's happening within the combined authority. So thank you, Emily.
So that's pinned you to the wall, and you're going to have to read this stuff. You can't complain ignorance. Okay, right. No other comments. Thank you very much for all. Thank you very much, Gordon, for being with us. I've got David Brown again.
That's Joe. It just relates to a conversation I was having over lunchtime. Where are we holding meetings in future? Is it always going to be here, or are we moving around? Or
The date of the next meeting is the 30th of September at Pathfinder House.
Yeah, but the rest of the TBCs.
I demur.
On that exact point, that is an item we are intended to have some internal conversations about. It's an item that's been raised with us by board members as well, and overview and scrutiny members in regard to our future approach. There's a general understanding from those members that have raised it that there is an expectation that we look to move around, but obviously in recent times we have been based here. So that is something we hope to bring some more clarity on by the next meeting.
Okay. 12 minutes past 1. Thank you very much indeed, everybody. Closed.